Storytelling in music and mathematics. This is going to consist of a lot of personal opinions. I invite anybody to pipe up, to challenge things that I say, to bluntly disagree with me, to shout when you do agree with me, to provide your own 2 cents. I'd be very interested in providing a bit of a back and forth between the audience and the speaker, because these are things that I'm going to be speaking today about, some things that I've thought about a lot, which come down to my personal philosophies on what music is, on what mathematics is. For me, music and mathematics have been a big part of my journey of self-actualization, which I think makes them very personal to me. And I'm going to be presenting that personal side of both of these two things. Now, what that means is that this isn't formal philosophy. This isn't spoken about very heavily. This hasn't been filtered through various different academics. But I believe that these are incredibly relevant parts of these two pursuits. And I think that every mathematician and every musician goes through some kind of development of their own theory of knowledge, or their own theory of art, or their own theory of mathematics, own theory of music. And I'm going to be talking very boldly about my personal ones. But I want to say that in a way that invites discussion. Okay, so don't look after me in today's talk. Let's discuss some of these ideas. I'd really enjoy that. What are the foundational objects of mathematics? Let's start with an easy question, right? In fact, I would argue that this question is not as fruit-bearing as one would hope, nor expect. There are a few canonical answers, but they all have their shortcomings. And the fact that there are several of them, I think, is in and of itself a little bit peculiar. Once you're a bit more of an advanced thinker about mathematical objects and mathematical foundations, it becomes clear that indeed there must be various different options for foundations. But when you're a novice coming into mathematics, I think it's very natural to think, oh, there ought to be one classical foundation. There should be one logic of the universe, and that's the logic that mathematicians study. And so we do have a few canonical answers, but all of these are a little bit perplexing. So let's write down some canonical answers. You might say that sets are that which is foundational. You might say types and terms are that which is foundational. You could also say objects. You could also say points and lines. Or maybe geometry more broadly.
Proofs, man. Proofs.
You can say proofs. Very popular answer. And you could say, what's another example? Something like syntax, right? And some of these start blurring together. So the claim that I want to make is all of these foundations, all of these suggestions, they're incredibly difficult to understand unless you have some kind of a narrative that follows alongside them. So if I were to take sets, for example, a set is very, like, if you go through the axioms of ZFC set theory, right? There's a bunch of them. You can Google ZFC set theory and you'll find the Wikipedia page that details all of the axioms. And if you just read these raw things, they're incredibly difficult to pass. And what Wikipedia does, and what any reasonable person that was explaining these axioms to you would do, is they would give you the formal definition, and then they would give you a description of what this is really saying, right? And it's this it's this phrase of what it's really saying that I want to dig into today. And so to put the claim boldly in writing, I'm going to say uh, the narratives behind these foundations are in fact part of the foundations themselves. And first, let me argue that this is not a widely spread opinion. The reason why I think this is not a widely spread opinion is because the way that it's because you could just remove the narrative, right? And some mathematical educators do this, and it can be very difficult to understand what's going on when they do this. I think a classic example is a topology class. So in topology, you learn that a topological space consists of a set along with a set of subsets of that set. And that set of subsets has to satisfy 3 axioms. You have to have the empty set inside that set. You have to have the whole set inside that set, etc., etc. And it's very common that topology is taught in this way. We just say, here are the axioms, and then off we go. We then start studying topological spaces. However, it's clear once you start studying topology seriously that these axioms didn't just arise from nowhere. They came from deep considerations about what is space, what is continuity, in what is the most general setting possible within which we can talk reasonably about Cauchy sequences or function approximation, etc., etc. And eventually you arrive at these axioms. And if you only just strip it away, then you get a really good example of what it looks like to just not have the narrative be part of the foundation. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that indeed we should be accepting the narrative as part of the foundations itself. And this is one of the main things that I think that mathematics has to learn from music. So I'll be coming back to this point later in the talk. First, I want to talk about depth. And by depth, what I mean is this vague term that people use when they're very passionate, right? So, oh, this piece of mathematics, it's very deep and you should pay attention to it. Or this other result, I think ultimately that's shallow and it's not really going to lead to something. So let's see if we can tie down some kind of concrete definition of what we mean by depth. And then we can use this in order to explain how music is deep in the same way that mathematics is deep. So the question is, what does it mean? For something to be deep? Now, I've arrived at an opinion of this because this was a phrase that always kind of confused me a lot. I heard a lot of mathematicians talk about how this was deep and that wasn't deep, etc. And I always kind of thought that what they meant was this is significant or this is profound or this is like interesting or cool, like this is really cool or something. And I never knew really what they were getting at, but as I paid more and more attention to the things that they were calling deep and the way that they would describe the depth, I found that there was quite a similar way that mathematicians used the word deep. And what they mean is they mean deep, right? So there are many different layers to it, and you can kind of keep further going down. And the more advanced concepts that you learn, the more you can have sophisticated conversations about this thing in a way that continues to give you mileage. So I think there's a very simple like demonstrative example of what it means for something to be deep. And we'll start with that example, and then we'll see if we can get some kind of concrete definition down. So I said that I was going to talk about mathematics and music, but I'm going to start off by talking about chess. So literally the board game chess. So I'm going to assert that this is a deep game. And the reason why is because first, one must learn the basic rules and the basic concepts, right? So let's forget the basic rules because everything has got basic rules. So there's always a 0th step. But the first step would be the basic concepts. Basic concepts. So develop pieces quickly. And by pieces, I mean your pieces on the back rank, right? So don't spend too much time at the start of the game moving your pawns around. Control the center. Develop knights towards the center, etc. Right? So these are kind of elementary guiding principles for the game of chess. Now that's pretty cool, but what's more interesting about chess is the fact that once you have understood these concepts, they then grant you the language and the understanding of the game to allow you to then learn the second layer of the game, which is a higher level of complexity, right? And a higher level of sophistication with towards the decisions that you're making in the moves. Okay, so there are some intermediate principles. Oh, I can't spell this morning. Intermediate principles. So these are, yeah, okay, basic concepts, intermediate principles. So tournament openings, or like book starts, they call them. I'm not a very good chess player, by the way. Critical pawn structures. And then planning / development. I feel like it would be nice if I had a better example here. Maybe if I go to advanced concepts. So forks, skewers, pins, and you can see we're developing terminology now. So hopefully this is stuff that you're not really aware of, because the point is, in order to describe any one of these, I need to use the language of the previous layers, right? Tempos, transitions, sacrifice, etc. And then it just keeps going, right? So highly advanced, and I can't say anything about that. And what is interesting about the game of chess is that you can spend your entire life learning it and still learn more, right? And that's what we mean by deep. And also, it's not just that you can spend your whole life learning it and still learn more. It's more than that. It's that you can spend your whole life learning it and you can still learn more things that will genuinely make you a better chess player, right? So it seems as though there is this infinite tower above the game of chess where every next layer depends on the layers before it, and as you get further up, you genuinely are still learning relevant material in order to deepen your understanding of the game, right? So this really gives you a concrete example of what we mean by depth. And I think that this is what mathematicians get kind of obsessed with. So when there are, because there are such things as quite shallow concepts inside mathematics, you kind of get to a point where it's like, okay, this seems to be most that you can say about this idea. This idea is fully explored and we're kind of at the end of it. So it's a relatively shallow concept versus something which is deeper, which just goes further and further and further in development the more that you build terminology and language toward it. Okay, does anybody have any comments on my observation of what depth means?
Yeah, I feel like I would. I guess I agree with everything you said on this board, but I wonder how much it depends on my sense that chess is not an arbitrary point in the space of games. I mean, if you tell me that there are infinitely many games, not slight trivial variations on chess, but, their own thing, which have a similar structure, from simple concepts to medium concepts and advanced. And I could choose one from this billion possible games to develop my understanding of and spend my life mastering. If you told me there was an infinite supply of such things, I might suddenly feel that any given one was kind of pointless and just a bit of an illusion, a kind of, to put it bluntly, masturbatory kind of activity, right? Where you're just sort of it's not really connecting to anything outside of yourself, right? If you're just engaged in following this one arbitrary game to its conclusion. Do you think that changes your sense of depth? So that then depth is not really an intrinsic thing to the game itself. It's something about the rest of the possible games. I don't know.
Yeah, so what is kind of missing from my definition here is the relevance to things outside of the thing, right? But the problem is that's kind of breadth at that point. So I'm not sure if that's really depth. But breadth is also an important concept in whether something is significant, and this is where concepts of profundity, etc., do become blurred with depth a little bit. So first and foremost, I mean, you've asked a complex question. I would respond with, do you believe that that's not true? I mean, even of mathematical concepts, do you believe that there are infinitely many deep mathematical concepts, or do you think that that's finite?
I don't know.
I don't know either, right? And also, even if it's infinite, I don't think that's as significant as the fact that there are some that aren't. So even if chess is one in an infinite number of deep games, there are at least games that aren't deep, like Go Fish. What are you going to do? What are you going to do with that game, right? So maybe you can learn some psychological techniques, but I don't think it's got the same depth as a game like chess. I also think that for chess specifically, people get a bit, what's the word, poetic about it because the rules are so simple to describe, right? Which is also not really true because no one really knows the full rules of chess because there are heaps of them and they're very complicated and there are lots of edge cases to consider. But it's approximately accurate to say that chess is simple to learn and difficult to master. And there are mathematical concepts like that as well. For example, the prime numbers. Very easy to become familiar with and to write down and to understand and to learn some basic theorems about. But you could literally spend your entire life learning about them and still develop even
but
further concepts.
Like chess somehow doesn't correspond very closely to anything in the outside world. Knowing chess doesn't let you predict, spectra of stars or something, right? But plenty of mathematics seems to correlate with many other things out there in the world. So I feel like when you say a mathematical fact is deep, you don't necessarily care that it connects to anything in physics or anything so mundane as that if you're a mathematician. But there's kind of like this web of meaning to which it connects, from which it draws its depth. So I really not sure I think chess is deep. I think like you can entertain yourself with it and it's not easy, but yeah, I guess I have a feeling that like chess is maybe deep or Weiqi is deep, but I guess I struggle a bit with looking over the fence at the Weiqi players like Lee Sedol and being like, you fool, you spent your whole life doing this pointless activity. And then I'm like, shut up, don't say the same thing about me. So,
Well, I think that Again, just to repeat my first answer, I think there's a question of depth versus breadth here. So let's put that on the board. And secondly, I think the main reason why people who have dedicated their lives to particular things and look over at other people that have dedicated their lives to other things and they don't understand why they've made that decision, you should be doing this, or I just would not feel that way if I were doing what you were doing. I think it comes down to self-actualization. I think that people connect with certain things and they harvest a meaning of life from it, and that's going to be the thing that you end up doing. Now, whether that is a thing that actually is genuinely deep or actually is genuinely broad or is meaningful or is significant or isn't significant, whatever, it's kind of outside the question of whether you're going to spend your life doing it, right? Like you're gonna, like whether it means it's deep or not, you're still going to do it if you find self-actualization inside it, I think. That's the observation that I've made. So people find self-actualization inside chess, people find self-actualization inside speedrunning a crappy NES game that was made 25 years ago, 30 years ago. There's a question of whether you're going to get reflection of self from it. So whether you're going to harvest an artistic experience from it. And that's kind of external as to whether the thing itself is actually deep. So I think it's reasonable that my definition seems a little flat, right? It's kind of like, oh, well, I think that my deep thing is way deeper than just anything that satisfies the implied definition of what we have here. I think that's reasonable. But this at least puts something on the table. And also I'm going to transition now. I'm going to transition into my next point because one thing that I want to say, okay, there's a clever way that I could tie this all together if I can get my brain to function. Recall that last time. Oh my God, I just lost my point. Sorry, give me 1 minute. If I look at my notes, I'll get it.
While you're thinking, I'll insert the comment, well said, about your
Thank you. Okay. Oh yeah, there was this whole thing about stop trying to find your true self. Okay, I remember my point. Good. Okay, so last time there was a criticism, which was stop trying to find your true self. Because this is philosophically problematic. It's not really philosophically problematic, but it's practically very problematic, right? You might end up not doing anything because you don't think that this is really the truest version of you, and you might fall into a self-existential black hole where you're trying to find yourself inside the abstract, and you might misunderstand previous philosophers to think that that's what they were encouraging you to do, where it's very unlikely that any serious philosopher was really encouraging this. And I understand that criticism. This criticism came up because I was talking about trying to find your true artistic self and your musical personality when you're trying to develop music. But I want to draw a distinction here between, well, one side of the coin is, I'm going to say applied philosophy, and the other one, I don't know what it is, but it's not applied philosophy, other. So pure philosophy or something like that. This is kind of where the problem lurks, is inside other. So you could become confused and you could think, okay, philosophy is in general a good thing. I should develop a more and more abstract concept of self, and I should really think about that until I make any important decision, because otherwise I run the risk of making a decision that's not aligned with my true self, and then I end up with regret and a wasted life. Okay, that is kind of where the problem is. By applied philosophy, what I mean is there are some philosophical questions that are really helpful to think about because they will genuinely make a difference to the way that you live your life, and it will make you live a more practical life, and it will make you live a good life and a better life, and all of these other vague terms that you can philosophize about. So, for example, a question like, what is love? What does it mean to fall in love? Is a very applied philosophical question, because as you think about that and as you philosophize about that more, the way that you interact with love is genuinely going to change. There will be visible difference in the way that you present yourself, like who you present yourself to, etc., etc. So that can be a very helpful thing to think about, as long as it's rooted in a concrete, tangential change in your behavior, right? And that is where I want to put, like, find your true musical self with the application of writing music, right? So here it's find your musical self so that you can write music. And I think it's very likely that if you were to do this, you'll start harvesting self-actualization from it, and it can become a very deep and philosophical experience for you, and that generates art, and music is art. So that's a good thing, if that were to happen. If that were to not happen, then at the very least, you're not going to put your external influences into your creation of music. So the point that I'm trying to make here is you want to not be opinionated about the type of music that is coming out of you. And if that seems weird, it's not. This is so much, so it's so everywhere that I can't even tell you. It's one of these things that people don't realize they're doing, and everyone thinks that everybody else is doing it, but they're not really doing it. And when you become more in tune with it, you can start removing those, like,
I lost
the word?
you. What are you talking about?
Okay. So let's put it like this. Let's put something like this. Well, okay, I guess the real no. Let's put it like this. Don't have an opinion on what the music should sound like during its creation.
I think I kind of know what you mean, but obviously you're alternating between generative and discriminative processes in music, like in math, and the discriminative process has to be something like what you think it should sound like. But so could you? I think you're distinguishing between two kinds of discrimination, and could you maybe put your finger on what the good kind is?
The good kind is the one that it doesn't seem like you did it, right? And this is what I'm trying to do.
No, sorry, I was just agreeing.
Oh, and that's what I'm trying to nail down here. And yeah, you're right. It is confusing the way that I'm writing it. So you could say should, as in like when. So picture when somebody else solves it for you. So maybe this is easier to explain in mathematics. So you're sitting down and you're thinking, you're stuck, and you can't work it out, and you've been in that state for a month. And then imagine somebody else comes along and they say, oh, yeah, have you thought about doing it like this? Or have you heard of this paper? Have you heard of this technique? And they write something on the board, and they write down like what is just so obviously the answer to the question, right? And you're looking at it and you're like, yes, that's it. That doesn't feel like it came from you, because somebody else came into the room and they wrote it down, and you had that experience of it was not you that did that. But it feels so right in a way, and that's the sense of should, where it should. That's the correct version of should. So that sensation of this is inherently right with respect to my like the phrase I want to use is true self. So with respect to the universe, this is the correct idea to go here. Or you could be saying to yourself, I want to write a black metal song, or I want to write a top 40s pop hit, or I want to write something that could be used in an action movie, right? So you're kind of deciding a priori what the song is meant to be. And then when you start trying to create it, you might be thinking, oh, no, this sounds like soul funk, or this sounds like a jazz song or something. And you're like, no, 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 that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. And then you start bludgeoning it. So there you're really forcing it to be a particular thing. And it's like, why, right? And I think that there are normally toxic reasons why we are wanting our theorems or our music to be of a particular style or to look a particular way. And I think that that gets in the way. And I think it gets in the way hugely. So I'm trying to help people understand that this is a block. This is a blockage that arises for writing music. And in fact, it's a main one. It's much more of a block than the other blocks that you think, like, oh, I can't play guitar, or I don't have the right software and stuff like this. No, 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 no. It's just not as big of a, like, that's not the hurdle. No, no, you can always make music with what you have, like always, right? And what's actually going to stop you from writing the music is the self struggle of, oh, this is not the type of music that I want to make. It's meant to sound like this. I wanted to do this. I'm inspired by these people. I want it to be like that. And I think that that blurs your musical personality. And I think that the journey that you go through as a musician of ridding yourself of those pre expectations of what the music should be, and also how it should reflect on you, is the biggest hurdle in music writing. And I think it's the biggest hurdle in mathematics creation as well, right? I mean, you see people want to become mathematicians because it makes them look smart and stuff, and they don't realize that that's why they're doing it, or it looks like success, or they've got some kind of personality that they've attributed to it. And they don't even realize that that is their biggest hurdle towards good mathematics, right? I just think the exact same thing exists inside music. And I don't think I've nailed it here.
Yeah,
But
how do you distinguish that from the kind of pathological desire to do something really new, man, which is just debilitating and it leaves somebody just wandering off into trivialities? I mean,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
a
that's
there's
a
a
really good question. I think it's just another example of the exact same concept, right? So if because you've decided a priori what it's going to be before you've even started, right? Like before you even have any idea what the idea is, you're saying it has to represent uniqueness and novelty, and it has to be groundbreaking. So I see it as like kind of bad parenting. That's the analogy I always like to use. Like if you haven't even met your child yet, they're still in the womb, and you're like, oh, they're going to be the world's best ballet dancer, just like I wanted to be, but couldn't on that fateful day when I broke my leg. Whatever, I'm making a joke, but you get what I mean. You need to be familiar with the thing before you have any idea what it is whatsoever. And you need to generate that feedback loop between you and it. And there are many different ways that you can do that. And mathematicians saying, oh man, I need to make this breakthrough thing. I really want it to be unique. I want it to be massive. At the same time, I don't think that's a bad motivation. You could be inspired by mathematics because that has happened before, and that part of mathematics is very beautiful. And that happens in music as well. Like there are some albums that people release that honestly feel like they came from a vacuum, and you're just like, how did they think of this, right? And it's so amazing when that comes out, and that can be very inspiring. So it's good to be inspired in that way, but deciding that your creation has to be that before you even started on it is so disabling, right? It's going to make it very difficult for you for you to do that. Like it's kind of the worst possible way to do that. If you really want to make something unique and novel, you have to generate like a routine and an artistic habit, and you inch your way there. And it won't seem like it came from a vacuum to you. It just might seem like it came from a vacuum to other people. And so you have to go through that journey. You have to at some point find a way to detach yourself from that personality and from that expectation and from that hope, And I think that philosophy is the way that you do that. You come to understand that you are part of a bigger thing, that creativity takes time, and other people's ideas influence yours. Nobody does exist in a vacuum, and no idea does come from a vacuum. And the more that you engage with it authentically, the more that you can bring an aspect of personality to it, right? And that's really helpful. It's helpful in mathematics as well. When people are discussing ideas, you can bring your personality to it, and you can almost have fun with it. You can say, "Oh, wouldn't it be like funny if this turned out to be true? Or wouldn't it be cool if we did it, but like with this constraint? Or what if we did it in this other setting? I wonder what that would look like." And they're actually good ideas. That's what having a good idea really looks like. And I think that having a personality, like, I don't know how to say it. If you're a mathematician, you need to have a mathematical personality. If you're a musician, you need to have a music personality. If you're an artist, you need to have an aesthetic personality, etc. I think having that personality and being playful with it and passionate toward it is the best way that you do end up having these good ideas. And it requires major steps of thought and self-actualization and self-realization in order to get there. And so I think that these philosophical ponderings are a genuine part of significant creativity when you're dealing with an abstract, sufficiently abstract artwork. And mathematics and music are both incredibly abstract. And if you don't think music is abstract, then like just think about the concept of crying to the music. Like that's crazy, right? That's like what's happening there. So it's definitely abstract. Okay. Any more comments on that before I go to another concrete point?
Nope.
Nice. So I kind of dumped a lot of my my content out of order there. So okay, let's do something a bit more concrete now. That's a good idea. So oh yeah, I remember now. So the point that I wanted to make was we have this concept of depth. I want to argue that music is also deep in this way. And that's at least one approach to music. It's a very helpful approach to music because it will give you some basic tools that you can use in order to really start creating something. And these are called musical techniques. So I spoke a bit about music techniques last time, but you can talk about these infinitely. So I'll give a few more now. And it's important to understand that rules are made to be broken, okay? So let's talk about melody. And I'm going to actually teach you something now, okay? So let's look at a piano. I used to draw these things all the time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I think is all I need. Good. Okay, that's an octave of a piano. Okay. And we have the concept of an interval, which is just a pair of notes. So 3 notes played at the same time or more, that's going to be a chord. A single note is just a note. And then 2 notes played at the same time is an interval, okay? And we can list the intervals because we've got a discrete set of notes here, right? If I were to choose a different instrument, like a violin that has a continuum, then we wouldn't have a finite number. But for the piano, we do have a finite number of intervals. There are 13 of them. These are unordered intervals, okay? And okay, so what I want to say is in music theory, we categorize these into 3 different groups. But what do I mean by in music theory? In music theory, I literally mean during the common practice period. The common practice period was Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Liszt, Chopin, all of the famous classical composers. And this was an important moment in history because complex musical techniques were being developed by these artists and not in any written way. So it was later that academics went back and studied their musical scores and then extracted these musical techniques from those people. But it's called the common practice period because lots of different musicians were doing the same thing at the same time. Although, fun fact, classical music theory is based almost entirely off Bach specifically. So this is really to be taken with a grain of salt. We're basically talking about one person's musical like rules, but it gives you a really good starting point. And ultimately, we want to develop our own. So let's organize these into consonants, which is quote unquote pleasant sounding, dissonant, which is ugly sounding, and then context dependent. Okay, and the first most basic interval, if I were to start with just an arbitrary note here, this is the note C, but it doesn't matter. If I were to take the two notes C and C, okay, so I'm just taking the same note twice, then that's called a unison, and that's considered consonant. Okay, if I were to take C and the neighboring note, that's a C sharp, this gives you a terrible mathematical ratio between the wavelengths of these two notes. And it was Pythagoras who believed that that like led to a dissonant sound. And it does sound very sharp and very harsh. They use this in like dramatic moments in horror movies and like intense moments of classical music, etc. So that's a minor second, and that's dissonant. Cool. And then the major second is the next one up, and this is also considered dissonant, and I think you'll agree if you heard it. So this is a major second, and then etc., right? So there are lots of consonant intervals, there are lots of dissonant intervals, and the context-dependent one, there's only one, and it's the perfect fourth. So in the current context, that would be C with an F. And I love the fact that one of them is context dependent, right? Because I think that's just an offering of infinite creativity. It's like immediately you're set with this exercise. Write a piece that uses a perfect fourth in a setting where is sound as it's my God, my words, where it sounds consonant, and then write another piece where a perfect fourth sounds dissonant. And you can do that by setting up different choices of chords that harmonize the melody, or by just putting certain flows of melodies around it that make it kind of make the melody land on a fourth in an ugly way or land on a fourth in a pretty way. And it's really cool that music does this because it looks so limited. Like when you just have these notes sitting there and you've only got 13 intervals, it's like, what are you going to do? But then the context dependency tells you what you're going to do. You're going to have to take the concept of time seriously, etc. I just think it's really cool that one of them is considered context dependent. Okay, and we want to use consonants and dissonants as tension and release, but I said that the wrong way around. So consonants use that as release and dissonants use that as tension, okay? So let's think about this as release and tension.
So I've had this conversation with Lucas before where how much of this is just we're trained to recognize this and how much is like somebody who just encountered Western music for the first time would totally get this correlation.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The only way that it's in like the only real argument you can make that this is somewhat universal is that Pythagorean argument. So have you seen this before? It's like the ratio of the wavelength of a note and then the wavelength of the same note up an octave is literally a 1:2 ratio. So you get this nice fraction 1/2, right? And then I think that a perfect fifth is a third or something. And then I think a major third is a fifth, maybe? I don't remember what they are, but you get all the nice fractions are all of the consonant ones, right?
Yeah, I
and
guess
then dissonant one.
I'm too ignorant to know whether that I should buy that argument or not. Do you think that's the explanation? It's a genuine question. I'm not being skeptical or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. I'm not so sure, to be honest. The reason why I'm not so sure is because you're completely correct that if you go to other cultures, none of this exists, not even the piano. And obviously they're enjoying their music. I mean, you go to Africa, right? And some African music is like purely a cappella backed with percussion, right? And so there's a lot of chanting, there's a lot of rhythm, and that is just a complete violation of everything that the common practice period tells you. But obviously, if you're raised in that culture, you're finding the music pleasant. You're not thinking like, oh damn, I just love these dissonant tones over and over. So they're obviously not thinking that, right? So the way that I think about it, and my grand musical theory for once I've got time in my life, is that we have different schools of musical theory. So you can write common practice, and you can write like even jazz, for example. I mean, these exist in complete juxtaposition from each other, and they're both Western, right? So it doesn't even merely depend on culture, right? And then I don't know, other cultural music, etc. And so these all kind of exist as theories inside the realm of music. And what I've always wanted to do is to look at mathematics with all of the different fields of maths and ask if there are any bridges that go across here, right? And the reason why I think that kind of answers your question is this is just one theory of music where in a given context, with a certain narrative, it all makes sense. And it's helpful to think about these notes in this way, in this context, for these pieces, etc. But it's the
Yeah,
same in mathematics. You might want to think about space as an algebraic topologist, or you might want to think about space as an algebraic geometer, and they're completely different opinions on what space is.
yeah, but
But
I'm
for
not
certain
aware of
contexts,
like
yeah,
the analogy with music is sort of okay. Well, these two musical practices evolved separately, and they have different opinions about basic questions. Um, that isn't doesn't really seem to be true of mathematics, right? It's not that Chinese mathematics came up with like a different attitude to foundations. It's not like there's Chinese foundations and Arabic foundations and English foundations, and they have different opinions about what is deep and what is beautiful. I think people more or less agree in a way that seems, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to be much more of a consensus than it is with music. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
isn't it true that when the world was more separated, that wasn't really how that wasn't really true? Like, didn't the Chinese believe that the numbers were fundamental, and the Greeks believed that geometry was fundamental, and they both had ways of discovering the other through their thing, but they really had different gods in their foundational understanding of mathematics. But also, I okay, there's always this question of like, is mathematics universal? If we found aliens, would they have the same mathematics as us? And the problem is, I think my answer to that is yes, aliens would have the same mathematics as us, but that's not significant that they would. And the reason why is because you might talk to an alien, and if you want to ask them, do you also have the Riemann-Roch theorem? And then they say, what's the Riemann-Roch theorem? And then you kind of have to explain what the Riemann-Roch theorem is to them. And when you're doing that, you're setting up a context and a foundation so that you can then describe the Riemann-Roch theorem, which is a consequence of that foundation. So an alien life form would be like, oh yeah, maybe we've found that, or maybe we haven't found that, or maybe our version looks slightly different. But if you were to do it your way, then yeah, I can see that you would have to arrive at your version of the statement. So mathematics is this like study of what follows and not what is. So if we talk to an alien foundation, they'll agree with us that that is what follows from what we did, right? But that doesn't really mean anything about the universality of mathematics. And I kind of see music in the same way. It's like you've got these it you got reasons why these schools of thought have developed, and there are relationships between them as well. And you do get complex, unexpected phenomena emerging. I mean, people have drawn some of these links, right? Like these do exist. You might think that they're bad, or you might think that they're uninteresting, but some of them do exist. And I think it's not crazy to view these schools of music as following from foundations in a way that could be similar to mathematics. If you were to explore these red links, maybe there are none, but I think I would find that more surprising. I would not be surprised if there is some kind of similar story between a field of mathematics and a field of music where the emergence and the story that they tell has a non-trivial relationship between the two of them. So for example, one of the best ideas I've heard for this kind of thing, just by talking to people, is using music as an internal language, right? So there might be some geometric setting or some category theoretic setting where one of these languages of music is sound with respect to that area of mathematics. Now, there, it doesn't have to be the deepest link possible. It's just what is stated inside this one language infers something on the other, and maybe it's not complete or something. But I would think that that's something, right? Anyway, that's like a famously controversial topic. So, okay, I've got about 5 minutes left. So I want to, again, I prepared way more material than I ended up presenting. But what I should do is give some responses to some of the things that were brought up last time, because a lot of great discussion came up last time, and I want to actually give some responses to them. So, okay, stop trying to find your true self. So I did talk about that already, but I'm going to put something else on the board, which I think is really important. So, true self. What we want to do is avoid self-betrayal. And this is important. And I think that a concept like subcultures and subcommunities, which again was brought up last time, are a very deep idea, and they're a very deep concept, and they emerge naturally amongst communities. So it's a very human thing. It's normal. But there are, and it's a good thing, and there's like good things about it, but there are problems. And I think the main problem that comes out of subcultures is self-betrayal. So like tattoos that people regret, drugs that people regret taking, and I don't know, violence is also an example in certain subcultures. These are things that people do because they think it's going to make them fit in, but it becomes self-betrayal because that's not who they really are to do those things. And that's very, very serious. This is really important for an individual's life. They have to tune into this in order to reach self-peace, some element of it. And you can really ruin that for your entire life. Anyway, that's getting too serious. But bringing that to the applied philosophy of music, you can do the same thing. You can just self-betray by getting too influenced by a subculture, right? And this just like further extends the point I was trying to make earlier. Okay, let me finish my responses and then we can talk. So, music outside of creativity and exploration. So yeah, I was quite snobby towards people who are not treating music like some self-actualization, exploration, like, you know, ingenuitive thing. I thought about this, and I think all I can reasonably do is refrain from commenting, right? To me, music is such a big part of my self-actualization, and I would not have had that self-actualization if I wasn't approaching music with such a focus to creativity and ingenuity and
Sorry to interrupt.
self-exploration, exploration of music and things like that. It's just so much so what music is to me that I don't know anything else, right? I don't have any interesting thing to say. I don't have any experience. in stuff outside of that, but I have a lot of experience within this. So I think at the end of the day, all I can say is there are other sides of music. I don't really know much about them, right? But in terms of creativity and exploration, I do feel fit to talk about it. And so that's what I've tried to do. I'm going to draw a man with his mouth zipped closed. Okay. And then creativity in repetition. So somebody posted, what is it? Jimi Hendrix's cover. Is that right? Yeah, Jimi Hendrix's cover of All Along the Watchtower, which was originally by Bob Dylan, right? Now, this is just not a fair example of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about releasing the same music that has already been made. So when I was preparing for this talk, I did go and find a pile of songs that have been released by different artists in different countries in different decades that I just think are so within the same isomorphism group that they're basically equal to each other. But it felt like a bit of a nasty exercise. I didn't really want to get up here and like point to these songs and be like, look at how uncreative they are. So I found such things, but I'm not going to present them. But what I want you to understand is that Jimi Hendrix completely changed Bob Dylan's song and he made it his. And there's of course creativity involved in that. And he's making the idea his. And that's just really not what I'm talking about when I mean releasing the same ideas. So what I'm going to put here is it's okay to copy, but play around with the idea and experiment with it for long enough until you can rightfully say that it's yours. And it's very clear that that's what Jimi Hendrix did. So he saw something inside Bob Dylan's song that Bob Dylan didn't see, right? Bob Dylan saw what he saw in that song, and Jimi Hendrix saw what he saw in that song. And Jimi Hendrix was presumably a fan and was like, oh, cool, I'm going to learn this song. And, I'm going to, and as he's learning it, as he's playing it, he's becoming so into it that he's making it his own. And I think that's really honest. And I think that's a really important part of creativity. And you can see that in mathematics as well. Like all PhD students write their own notes on things that have already been well understood for years and years and have already had many different volumes written on them. It's not a waste of time. You're making it yours, right? And that's really important. But there is a difference. It's hard to define, but you know it when you've done it, right? Like if you're making it yours, then that's a good thing. You're finding a way to you're developing your understanding of your own personality with respect to this art form, and that's necessary and important and good. And you can even release that if it became sufficiently personalized. But be aware of the difference between just plagiarism and making the idea your own. And I think that this is a good start. It's okay to copy, but play with the idea for long enough until you can rightfully say that it's yours. Okay, I'll conclude there and we can have some questions and discussion.
Thanks, Will.
You're welcome. Okay, were there questions in the chat that weren't AI? Oh, did the AI ones not go into that anymore?
The AI doesn't appear in the chat. No, I think most of that was talking to the bots.
Yeah.
I'll communicate one of the haiku, which was Basho's journey ends. Illness takes him from this world. Haiku live on still, which I think captures another major motivation for doing creative and original work, right? It's a kind of suppressed play at immortality quite often.
Yeah, I think you can go too far with that as well, though. Do you know that a lot of the conservatorium, like the classical music schools, that's so much of that is preservation. So you learn to play the piece the way that Beethoven would have played it, right? And the idea is that you lose marks if you kind of put your own personality into it. And the people that do best in those courses are those that reproduce what Beethoven did as well as possible. And I don't know, maybe that's veering into this second thing, like music outside of creativity slash exploration, where I don't really feel fit to comment. I personally just, I can't see why somebody would want to pour those kinds of hours into music and then reproduce as accurately as possible something that already existed. People obviously do that and find meaning in it and value in it, and governments fund it as well. So it must be important for some reason. But I think that I personally think you can go too far with that. Like carrying on the torch of those that have passed on.